Thank you for joining me for another episode of Think Your Way to an Epic Life. This is the longest podcast I've ever recorded and I swear I could have kept going for a couple more hours if I didn't have one to do right after this. So please enjoy. Andy is very real. He's Scottish, which is fun to listen to him anyway. And he's very open, he's very vulnerable, and he has helped over 6,000 people get and stay sober. So enjoy this. I really did. Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
My goodness, I've been so excited about this interview. You are doing it. I mean, you are, of course, we talked about that. I talked about that when I introduced you, but you are doing it. So you grew up in Scotland in a pub. Start us off
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I had a great childhood. I was born in the north of England. We moved up when I was 7 years old to the Shetland Islands, which, for those of you who maybe heard of it, not quite sure where it is, it's as far north as you can get and remain in the UK. It's on the way. You've got next stop is the Faroe Islands and then Iceland. So it's right kind of on the sort of the edge of the North Sea and the Atlantic. Probably slightly closer to Norway than it is Scotland itself. But amazing place to grow up as a kid. I grew up in a small island, 7 miles by three. You just made your own kind of entertainment. There wasn't, I guess, in theory, a lot of stuff to do. But yeah, you learned how to build bonfires and scavenge for things on the beaches and clambering over the rocks and stuff. A wonderful place for a kid to grow up. It's a spectacular place. I mean, there's TV shows and stuff about Shetland, and it's on a beautiful day. There are probably very few more beautiful places on earth. Beautiful, great white sandy beaches, and but it's very, very cold, so you don't get to enjoy them perhaps as much as you like. And yeah, very, very happy to call it home.
Home sweet home. So what is the deal? Your parents owned a pub and that's how you lived in one?
Yeah, we moved up there in 1974 and bought a big old 8 bedroomed house. It was practically derelict, and with the intention of turning it into a pub and to a guest house. So there was an old couple living in it, literally in 2 rooms in the house. The rest of it was pretty much uninhabitable. So we moved in there as a family and gradually just sort of slowly spread our wings out into more and more rooms and renovated the place over the course of probably 3 or 4 years. A wonderful adventure. And yeah, so we had some outbuildings that we turned into a bar. There wasn't a bar on the island before we moved there. And yeah, some very, very happy times. We did that for about 10 years, but I think it probably took quite a toll on my folks eventually, and we sold it on as a going concern to the next custodians of it. And yeah, such an adventure to, I think, I think as a kid to um, be in certainly what was a less than comfortable type situation, but being involved in the sort of the renovation of it and understanding that kind of process about how you can shape your own environment and the I guess the benefits of hard work and things like that. I look back with, even though it wasn't particularly comfortable at times, with enormous fondness for the adventure that it gave me.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, pubs in general, bars in America are it's a place for people to go. It's like Cheers, and you walk in and everybody knows your name
Yeah.
and Norm, and it's like, oh, I feel wonderful. This is, and so you associate that to drinking.
Oh,
When
absolutely. I guess, I grew up in an environment where our very livelihood depended on people consuming alcohol in our house. And it was a real focal point on the island. As I say, there wasn't a lot to do. You had the public hall and the pub. And that was kind of it. So, if you wanted to get out and meet other people. You either went to their house or you went to the pub. And so it was lovely to kind of create that sort of, I guess, environment for people to socialize in a way that they'd not been able to kind of do before. So it became quite a, it was quite a nice feeling to grow up in that sort of environment. But obviously, it did for me, as I look back on now, it very much kind of normalized heavy alcohol consumption as just something that everybody did. And obviously, as we will come on to, that had quite a big impact on the rest of my life.
Well, sure, and I can relate 120%. Like, that is normal. As soon as you get home, you start drinking. That's what you do, and that's what
Yeah.
everybody does because that's all you see. You're just okay. So, when did you start drinking?
So I think probably dabbled with it through most of my childhood. I can remember a particular wedding when I was 13 years old, sitting and attempting to drink a bottle of whiskey. And I think I did maybe manage it for about 10 minutes before all hell broke loose. And I was not a well person after that. But yeah, that was a little bit of a kind of a rite of passage. I grew up in an environment where, as a young man, you were very much kind of judged by how much you could had your drink, as they would say, and hey, a dram, have a dram is have a shot is kind of like a handshake up there, and if you don't take a drink from somebody, it's quite a rebuke. They would kind of go, have I offended you in some way? Why will you not have a drink from me? So it becomes incredibly kind of interlaced into the kind of social fabric of what's going on. And I think as my kind of relationship with alcohol sort of evolved and I became incredibly dependent on it, there was still this kind of underlying conflict, which was, but you're not a real man if you can't, drink a bottle of whiskey. I tell the story to my clients of probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Again, the social sort of scene in the island at Christmas and New Year, you went and visited, other people in their homes, and you took a bottle and you received drink and all this kind of stuff. And so I was seeing this at sort of 8, 9 years old. There's a wonderful chap called Brian who grew up in the same island, and bearing in mind this is a small island with about 300 people in it. And Brian was, when I was about 8, Brian was probably about 20. And I remember somebody saying to me, Brian was sitting in the corner drinking a lager or something. And this person saying to me, see Brian, he can drink a case of Tennant's lager, so 24 cans of lager, and still stand. And I was like, that was my kind of, what I call it, my Batman moment. I felt like I'd just met Batman and I wanted to be like him. And I wanted somebody to talk about me like that. These kind of slightly hushed reverential term, they were sort of kind of the way they were talking. And when I look back now, I realize that had a huge impact on me, that how this kind of young man who was kind of struggling to find his way in the world and how, where's my relevance and stuff like that. It all of a sudden, it was like a big signpost. It's kind of like, drink loads of Tennant's lager and you will be respected. And you look back at that stuff now and kind of shake your head and go, well, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. But then, given all the research I've now done with the subconscious mind and things like that, it doesn't have to make any sense whatsoever. It just has to create an emotional kind of pathway that you can equate one with the other. Drink a case of Tennant's lager, get the respect that you feel that you're looking for in this world. And it took me a long time to kind of ditch the kind of the concept that if you couldn't had your drink, if you couldn't drink copious amounts of alcohol, you were in some way a failure. You were a loser if you couldn't do that. And that was probably I think on my journey, it was probably the last sort of thing that I needed to finally stare down. It's kind of like, actually, this doesn't make you a failure or a loser. And actually, I choose now to interpret it in a different way. If somebody's putting me under pressure to drink alcohol, I think it's the ultimate act of courage or bravery to just go, no, why should I do that just to please you or to make you feel comfortable about what you're doing? It, I've always been a big advocate of, I'm not anti-alcohol. I'm certainly anti what it can do to people, but it's kind of, I don't want to inhibit what other people can do who maybe, will have the occasional glass of wine or something like that. Sometimes you can see those people feeling uncomfortable and they're like, is this okay? Is it all right if I have a glass of wine with my dinner around you? And I'm like, yes, of course. This is my journey. You're on your journey. And if it's not a problem for you, then it's not for me to preach or say that it's wrong or whatever. And I think that was a kind of a big part of this whole thing for me. I didn't want to become a burden that, everybody's going to run out the room and it's like, oh my God, Andy's here. Nobody can, sort of, enjoy themselves or whatever. But, this whole kind of culture, I think particularly, I work with a lot of Scottish people, a lot of Irish people where, alcohol's just become so heavily intertwined with almost every single transaction that we have as human beings. It takes quite a bit of sort of, I guess, a mindset shift, a paradigm shift to kind of lift yourself just at least one step above that and go, you know what? Actually, I want to be social. I want to spend time with my friends. It's just I'm choosing to take the alcohol element out of it. And I went out with my very closest friends just before Christmas. There, we went out for a curry. We went into town, and it's interesting that when I went out, I used to be obsessed about, right, whose round is it? Who's getting the beers in and all this kind of stuff. And you look back and you think, wow, you're a bit of an a-hole kind of doing that kind of stuff. Whereas now I have conversations with people that I can remember. I catch up with their news. I ask them if they're okay. And I take my car because I can drive my car, and I spend a lot of money to have it just sitting there in the driveway. And I'll maybe pick some of my friends up. I'll maybe give some of them a lift home. And and it's a different experience, but it's better. But I think a lot of this is about kind of it's like decoupling. It's like if you take the alcohol away, can you still have the experience that you want? It's not about isolating yourself or anything like that. It's about enjoying it in a different way, because it's invariably better.
Eh, I'm sorry. I'm just taking it all in. I'm not even in my mode of okay questions because it's so true. What you're saying is so powerful, and people need to hear that. I guarantee there are people that are listening to this that really don't want to drink, but they feel all those social pressures that you're talking about. What was it that made you? How did you go from being someone who was very, very proud of drinking a bottle of whiskey to someone who doesn't care to drink?
So it's interesting that, and I suppose it comes back to what I was saying before around sometimes these little subconscious sort of linkages that we have, they don't tend to make a lot of sense. So I guess on the face of it, I would say Michael Jackson got me sober. The song "The Man in the Mirror." There was one morning. Long story short, I was in a job that I was really miserable at. I was working really hard, but it was really stressing me out. And generally, I've had a lot of fairly big kind of jobs and things like that, but this one was getting to me, and I was drinking a lot to try and kind of cope with it all. And I'd had a huge panic attack in my local supermarket. And I'd never really had one like this before, where I literally thought my heart was about to explode out of my chest. lost my balance. My skin was on fire. I literally fell into the meat fridge in this supermarket. I'm lying there next to all the sausages and the bacon and things like that. And a little old lady actually helped me kind of up. And she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was trying to tell her that I just slipped and things like that. And I remember just very clearly looking at the floor and just sitting there and trying to work up courage to kind of stand up again and thinking, boy, you need to do something about this. This is not right. You are killing yourself here. And I got a young son. I've got two older kids. I've got a young son. I just, whoa. And so a few days later, I was running late for a meeting and I was in my car and feeling just miserable and stressed and anxious. And I came to a railway crossing, a level crossing, as we call it in the UK. And the red light started to flash, which means the barriers are going to start to come down in a little minute. And I was late already, and I was like, "Oh, if I floor it, I might be able to get across and beat the train." And I got to within about 50 meters of the barriers, and it clearly was not going to work. And I slam on the brakes, and again, I had a little moment where I was just thinking, "Oh, what are you playing at here? You're actually dicing with death here, because you're late for a meeting." And I was sat there, and the song, "The Man in the Mirror," Michael Jackson, came on. And it was interesting that I was in the car because I was looking at myself in the rearview mirror and the big dark circles under my eyes and the bloodshot face. And it was the chorus that I'm starting with the man in the mirror and I'm asking him to change his ways. And my entire mindset, my life shifted on one word, which was asking, because I'd spent a decade beating myself up about this stuff. And there was two different versions of me. There's one that's crying out, going, "Please stop doing this to yourself." And then the other one that was just scared and terrified and, believed all this rubbish that had been taught as a young man about Batman and things like that. And I just literally looked at myself in the mirror and I asked myself out loud, I just went, are you up for this? Are you going to take it seriously? And it was like somebody else answered me back. And, this figure in the mirror just nodded and went, "Yeah, I'll do whatever it takes." And I phoned my boss. I said, "Right, okay, I'm not well. I'm going to take a few days off." And he was his usual unsympathetic self. And so I was very good at what I did professionally. I was a business leader. I was a sales coach. I was a record-breaking influencer salesperson. I was really good at changing how other people felt about things. And yet I felt like I was living this complete lie that I was just breaking up inside. And that sort of man in the mirror perspective gave me this kind of like, well, what if I treated that kind of side of myself that just doesn't want to let this stuff go? What if I treated them like a client? What if I cooperated with them and worked with them to take them on this journey that I know I can take other people on? So there's a little lake near where I live, and I literally got all of my coaching and old kind of course materials and everything. And I put it all in my car, drove down to the car park overlooking this lake, and I literally was there dawn to dusk for 3 days. And again, it was interesting being in the car because I thought the answers are in here somewhere and I just need to find them. And it got me very focused. And so I came up with a process that I knew worked for other people. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to push myself through this process now. And some of the things in there I'd actually tried before, but I tried them kind of singly and they'd not quite worked. And so I'd given up on them. And so I was like, right, well, I'll start with that and then I'll do that. And then I'll put a bit of that in and I just made a deal with myself that I would not quit until I'd done all of it. And bit by bit, things just started to shift and I could literally feel, I was like, oh, I'm kind of just resonating with this in a slightly different way. And I went back and Louise, my partner, I said, something's funny going on here. I feel like something's shifting. And of course, she's like, kind of, yeah, all right, we'll see. And, actions do indeed speak louder than words. And I knew something was shifting, but I couldn't quite explain it. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to just keep going. And I think one of the key things for me was I chose to look at this as a positive journey rather than being retrospective about it and going, well, I must not do this anymore. I thought, you know what, I'm getting much clearer on how my life will improve if I sort this out. And so I used that to fuel me on. And then, days turned into a few weeks, and then something very interesting happened probably about 6 or 7 weeks in. I remember I woke up one morning and I'd slept really well, and I woke up and I just went, I feel amazing. And, don't get me wrong, every morning is not like this for me. But I was like, I can't remember the last time I felt like this. And all of a sudden that gave me something. I thought, I don't want to throw this away because this is too good. And it took me to get that kind of personal connection with it. And that was pretty much it. I just thought, no, I've now made the decision that I'm going to continue on this journey. And it has led to the most incredible adventures. I mean, now I've helped 6,000 people get sober. I have ridden the Tour de France on my bike. I've ridden up Mount Everest on my bike. At the end of this month, I'm going to Norway to compete in a fat biking race across the snow, which is a qualifier for the Iditarod race in Alaska.
You ride a bike on the
On snow.
Iditarod?
Yeah. So it started off as obviously a dog sledding race, but you
Right.
can now do it on foot or on a bike. But you have to be invited. You have to qualify, and this is one of the qualifying races. And bear it in mind, when I started on this journey, all I wanted to do was either A, not die, and B, not get thrown out of the house. And it's just opened my eyes to, and I do all this stuff for charity because as I often say to people, I've spent quite a lot of my life hating myself, waking up every morning, calling myself all sorts of names, about why you can't, deal with this. Why can you not do that? And for me to go and do this kind of stuff, first of all, I love it. It's quite an adventure and it's taught me a lot about myself. But actually, to go and raise money for good causes is quite a nice little bit of yin and yang for that, because it just feels nice to feel a bit better about being me. Because I spent 35 years not being terribly impressed with who I was at all.
Okay, so you said there's so much, but the one thing that you said that was so powerful, and you just kind of threw it in your sentence was, "I decided."
Yeah.
Those two words, "I decided." I don't think people grasp the power of those. Can you riff on that a little bit?
Yeah. And um, I think, to decide, to make a decision, I think it quite often comes from a place of inspiration, which can be positive or negative. Sometimes it's I'm not willing to put up with this anymore, or and I guess I've described both there in terms of falling into a fridge in my local supermarket, thinking I'm going to have a heart attack, and going, you can't do this anymore, or waking up in the morning feeling better than I'd probably done for 30 years. I probably needed both of those to really fully kind of commit. And I think if there's probably one thing that this whole journey has taught me, is just to keep your eyes open. And it starts with a bit of a sense of, having a bit of a vision about where you want to get to. It's, how would my life be better? Rather than kicking myself all the time, how would my life be better? Have I got a bit of a sense around what that could look like? Because that just opens up your subconscious mind like a flower. Rather than, going like, well, I can't do this. Your subconscious goes, okay, I get it. I'm not even going to bother trying. If you go, actually, wouldn't it be nice if this was to happen? All of a sudden, your subconscious starts to look for things that you would have walked right by beforehand, and inspiration starts to come up. The number of emails I get from people where they say, Andy, you're not going to believe this, and I'm like, I really will, because I get these all the time. And I've seen people. I've got a lovely lady that was one of my very earliest clients back in sort of 2017. And again, a conversation that started with, oh, how can I sort this out? And she got herself back on her feet and, started to look up again. And she shared in one of my Facebook groups, she said, oh, I've rediscovered my childhood love of crochet. And everybody was like, okay, that's okay. And then she started sharing some pictures of some stuff she was doing, and she was amazing at this. So she started selling some stuff on Etsy, and then people were getting in touch and saying, oh, could you put my daughter's name on that pillow that you did, or the cushion cover and all this? And she was getting commissions. And then I got the message, and it was like, Andy, you're not going to believe this. And I'm like, try me. And she said, I've just been approached by my local college to be their crochet instructor on their arts and crafts course. And you're like, okay. When we had that first conversation, nobody predicted that. And that is just, I think that for me is the real joy of this journey. You kind of, you got this self-imposed kind of prison sentence, which is all about your own fears. I talk a lot about fear with people, because your comfort zones are just, no matter how uncomfortable they are, they're familiar. And to step outside them means you're going to stare down something that you're scared of. I had a lovely client about a year and a half ago who was a big cricket fan. He was a semi-retired gentleman. As he said, I spend quite a lot of my summer days sitting in a cricket ground drinking lager. And so I was working with him, and he was doing really well. And then he was going to meet an old university friend that they met once or twice a year. And he said, I'm going to meet this guy, and he's not going to be impressed that I'm not drinking, because we always get together and it's really messy and all this kind of stuff. So we had a call. He was going to meet this guy on the Saturday, had a call on the Friday. And we were literally role playing out what he was going to say to this guy about, look, it's okay. You drink what you want. I'll give you a lift home, and all these kind of reasons and everything. And then we were going to catch up on the Monday morning. And I thought about him all weekend. I thought, no, you know what? I've got a feeling he'll probably have crumbled, because this was going to feel like a real challenge for him. And so I called him up 9 o'clock Monday morning. How'd it go? And he burst out laughing. And I was like, okay, tell me more. That's not the response I was expecting. And he said, well, I met my friend at 10 a.m. in the bar, and I started the speech. And he said, I got about 2 or 3 sentences in, and the guy just held his hand up and said, I'll stop you there. And he said, thank F for that. And he said, I've been meaning to say something to you for a while, because it's great to see you, man, but we just get completely screwed up. And then I go home in a right old mess, and my wife doesn't speak to me for 2 weeks, and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of like what you were talking about before, about, we're all kind of complicit. Nobody really wants to put their hand up and go, you know what, I'm not having fun here. So we all just kind of play along. And I was in such admiration of this guy who was my client, because he had the courage to have that conversation. And had he not done so, then it would have just played out like it always did, and they'd have both got very drunk. And he actually said to me, he said, the thing is, Andy, I sat and I drank soda and lime all day. He said my friend had about 3 lagers over the course of the entire day. And he said, the thing is, it's the best day we've had at the cricket for years. I said, funny, isn't it? And it's just that kind of reframing thing, you don't have to go without. And I think so many of us have forgotten that. People, when I speak to them, they say, I don't know how I'll have a good time without alcohol. And you will, it's just you've forgotten how to. And sometimes it's just a matter of reminding yourself and relearning some of the stuff that you knew already. And that's where, tools like NLP for reframing and things like that, just to start to shift that paradigm and shift your mindset, can be so powerful on this journey.
Okay, so AA is a big thing. What would you say is the major difference between getting a personal coach to walk you through this and going to AA meetings?
So I think, AA is obviously is the kind of the household name. I went to AA meetings and it did not resonate with me. One of the things I knew was about affirmations. You become what you tell yourself. So there's a whole load of people who were parrot fashion saying, hello, my name's Dave and I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, well, I'm here to try and not be an alcoholic because I want to get over this. And actually, these people are almost in a new trap because they're telling themselves a story that is becoming the new reality. And, there are some really great kind of aspects to it, about helping other people and things like that. But from a psychological standpoint, I thought this makes no sense to me whatsoever, that we should sit and dwell on the problem and hope that the solution arrives. For me, I wanted to focus on the solution. I wanted to focus on what I had to gain. I've never been interested in counting the days. I've just had my 8th sober Christmas. I know that much, but I couldn't even tell you the date that I had my last drink. And I'm not interested in knowing about it. And there was somebody kind of challenged me about that and said, well, it doesn't matter. You don't know your date, but it is important and it is significant. And I said, but, there is a day probably in 1968 or 1969 when I last filled a nappy because I wasn't able to go to the toilet. Now, knowing that date and when it was does not help me keep my trousers clean today. And so, at some point you kind of have to move on. And I just couldn't get my head around the kind of the perpetual one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. I didn't want that. And, the success rate is estimated at somewhere between 8 and 12% for AA, but it's huge, it's massive, and it's helped a lot of people. But I'm probably as close to the polar opposite of that mentality as you'll probably get, because it's kind of like, look, you've accepted it's an issue. Let's now move on. You don't need to keep kind of beating yourself up about that. And I've never been one for labels. So, people say, oh, well, if you don't call yourself an alcoholic, you're in denial. It's just, that's not my mindset. It's not what I see kind of tends to work in real life. Nobody ever gets thin by berating themselves for being fat and calling themselves a fat idiot or something in the mirror when they're brushing their teeth in the morning. But, and I'm very much that, and also the subconscious mind, in terms of what I've now learned, is that the subconscious mind does not deal in negatives at all well. So if you say, I need to stop drinking, all that tends to happen is your subconscious just comes up with pictures of you drinking all the time. It's a bit like, whatever you do, don't press that red button. Like, oh, what red button? Oh, there's a red button over there. Well, what does the red button? I'm now fixated on the red button. What does it do? Why can't I push it? And what happens if I do push it? So you've got to give your subconscious mind something to do. It's a bit like, I've got a rescue dog from Cyprus and she's lovely, but if I want her to sit, I ask her to sit. I don't say to her, don't stand up, because she'll look at me and then when she doesn't do what I want. I say, don't stand up, don't stand up. And then now she's stressed because she thinks she's in trouble. But she still doesn't know what I want her to do. So the subconscious is a bit like that. You've got to give it some very clear instructions. And at some point, you will be faced with a decision as you move forward. A decision. I need to decide whether to drink or not have a drink. And the thing is, if option A is to have a drink, and if option B is nothing more compelling than don't do option A, then to be fair, option A is probably going to win. Whereas if option B is about, you know, being an amazing father to your children, about being the partner you always want to be to your wife or your husband, about knowing that when you're away on holiday, you know, you can jump in a car if somebody has an accident or something like that and you can get them to the hospital, or just whatever, you can choose to really encourage yourself on this. And, as I say, my expectations were very low when I started off on this journey, and just, subsequently, it's like, right, wow, riding a bike up Mount Everest to Everest Base Camp, the hardest thing I've ever done. There is just literally no air up there. But you learn so much about yourself in that kind of space where you're like, what am I capable of? I rode the Tour de France in 2018, all 21 stages of it. And you would finish certain days and you'd go, I don't quite know how I did that, but I'm quite interested to kind of maybe learn from it. And you start to kind of realize that your potential, you're so far away from the edge of it. Whereas, this was a guy before that, the slightest thing would happen, I would throw my hands up and they're like, right, okay, where's the bottle of gin? And that would just be it. And then you wake up the following morning feeling worse. The problem is still there. And now you've got to do it with a hangover. But it's been such an extraordinary journey of kind of self-fulfillment, I think, that anybody who says this is about quitting drinking, I think is kind of selling it short a little bit. Because I think if you get the mindset right and really focus on the positives, and not to put yourself under pressure, to be all things to all people, but just go, what if I wasn't drinking myself into an early grave? What might my life be like? And then just allow your subconscious mind to do the rest, to start to spot the opportunities, fall in love with your childhood, crochet habit and things like that. It doesn't have to be a Tour de France or something like that. But just, when people, I sometimes ask people, what is it that makes you happy? And they sometimes go, I don't know. It's so long since I've kind of felt happy. I don't know. And it's kind of like, right, okay, well then let's start going back over things that have made you happy in the past. Let's use those as clues, and then we'll just open up the subconscious and we'll start from there.
I cannot applaud you enough, because it is very, very true. When you're trying to deal with the conscious mind, you are fighting an uphill battle that you cannot win.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with the subconscious mind, you can absolutely move mountains. It's amazing. And so, guys, we've talked about the decision several times, and when you look it up, it comes from the Latin word decision, and it's cut. And so when
Yeah.
it's decision, you cut off from. And so it is the most powerful thing. The power of a made up mind is like, it's unstoppable. I mean, we've seen little old women lift up buses because they were on their baby. And so that is what you're tapping into. What is your success rate?
I mean, if people talk to me in terms of coaching, so some people do go dark, but in terms of if people engage with me, it's pretty much 100%, because at some point you come up against the reasons why you've not been successful in the past. And as one of my clients, who's now a very dear friend, has got a great turn of phrase. He said, it's very difficult to see the label when you're inside the jam jar.
Yes.
And you need somebody to go, look, hey, there's this thing here, you know. One of my favorite phrases in the whole world is, the magic that you're looking for is hidden in the work you've been avoiding.
Amen.
And there's a reason why you're avoiding it. It's because you're scared, because you've not even thought of it yet. So by having somebody, you know, I've got my own experience, of course, but I've also got the experience of 6,000 other people that, you know, it's like, okay, I get it, that this is tough. This is a challenge. This is an obstacle you've not managed to get past. Well, here are some options, you know, and it's a bit like that guy in the cricket ground. It's just to, you know, get that sense that you're not alone on this journey and you don't have to work it all out for yourself. There's somebody with you that is equally as invested. You know, I love the quote from the great Wayne Dyer, who said, if you knew who walks beside you on this path that you have chosen, you would never feel fear again. And, you know, again, the subconscious, we're all connected, and you just tap into this amazing inspiration. And yeah, you know, and it works. Um, and I love it. You know, it's not about getting people to stop drinking. It's about getting people to start enjoy living again. Um, and you know, I'm always willing to do whatever it takes to help them get there.
And so I think a lot of people think that I can just lean on my spouse, my kid, my aunt, my uncle, my so and so. And I want to say, before you even answer this, as someone who grew up in an alcoholic family, um, you have probably hurt them so bad at this point that they don't have the strength to help you. Why should someone get a coach instead of try and lean on their family?
I think that's a really good point. I think the thing is that your family is terrified, and so they're not going to be giving the advice you need. Your family may also be the problem, as well, you know, and there may be influences. And that's not to say that, you know, it's about, yeah, see, I told you that, you know, you're whatever, you know, the chances are, well, I would say in all cases, it's not your fault that you got in this situation. However, it is your responsibility to do it, because nobody's coming to do it for you. And it may be that your partner, so you know, I'm on the second lap in terms of you know, marriage and things like that. My ex-wife was hypercritical, you know, would nag the living whatever out of me, and then it became an act of rebellion to drink excessively. Whereas Louise, my new partner, she kind of loved me through this, and you know, she was terrified and she was scared that, you know, my young son was going to grow up without a father, and she put pressure on, but in a different way. She had expectations, that I would sort this out. And there was also an element of, if you don't sort this out, I'm not sure what our future looks like. So I was, you know, she was not enabling me in any way, shape, or form, but she came at it from a place of concern. And I think sometimes it's quite hard for family to do that, because I think Louise, my partner, is quite exceptional on that front. And I think sometimes some people, when they've been hurt a lot, you've got a lot of baggage. And, you know, it's interesting when you talk to people about triggers, for example. It's like, oh, I'm triggered, I want to drink and whatever. We've all got triggers. You know, there's kind of, you know, somebody comes in from work and they stumble over their words a little bit. Somebody instantly goes, have they been drinking? Are they slurring? You know, boom, there's a huge trigger. And then, you know, even that in itself can start an argument, which can then lead to the person drinking. You know, I quite often speak to partners, and you know, they're often curious. It's like, what can I do to help this person, you know, that I love so much, to do that? And I say, well, rather than doing what most people do, which is criticizing them for what they're doing wrong, try and catch them doing things right. And that is also a two-way street. It's when people are saying, oh, my wife does this, my wife or husband does that. I say, but when they do something that helps you, do you make sure that you let them know? Because you need to do that. When you, just little things like when you said the other day, that you were proud of me for getting through that dinner party without, getting drunk or whatever. That meant the world to me, and thank you. I really appreciate that. Just watch them do it again. We all respond more positively to that kind of way. But I think generally with family, we've all, families of addicts have been through so much. It's kind of, there's not a lot left to kind of give the objective help that they need. And quite often as well, when people have not experienced this for themselves, they kind of go, yeah, but they don't think it's a problem. Trust me, there is nobody who is addicted to anything that doesn't think it's a problem, whether they're willing to admit it to the people that they love or even to themselves. That's a very different thing, because, I always felt that I was so critical to myself. The minute anybody said anything critical, I just couldn't bear it. I couldn't have anybody else joining in on what was already going on in my head. So that came out as defensiveness. It's like, no, I haven't had a drink. I've not got a problem. I'm only going to have one, and all this kind of stuff. Because in my mind, I'm going, they're right. They're right. And when people are criticizing others, it's a bit like, if somebody was to criticize me and say, oh, Andy, I hate your long flowing blonde hair, I would be like, that insult would have nothing on me because I'm bald. Whereas if somebody said, oh, Andy, the fact that you're bald and you're maybe a bit overweight and, it makes you look quite old, that would hurt in a very different way, because part of me would be agreeing with them. And so, I think this, how you support somebody through this is a bit of an art. And quite often family are just too close, and sometimes they're kind of, part of the issue as well. Maybe it's expectations, maybe it's, just stuff that's happened in the past or whatever.
And they're not trained.
Which is also very true, and also yeah, you're just too close to it. You're not really, you've not got a sense of outcome. You're quite often coming at it just from your perspective. I want this pain that I feel to go away. And you can't help somebody from that perspective generally, because you can't give them the space they need to work out the answers for themselves. Because you just, your resilience is often quite low.
So, how are your relationships now compared to how they were when you were drinking?
I mean, there's just literally no comparison. I think first and foremost, it's probably the relationship I have with myself. And I think when you sort that out, then everything else starts to come around. I mean, my daughter was 14 when I quit. She's 22 now. And it was interesting when I'd made my mind up that, I wasn't going to drink alcohol anymore. I said to her, oh, just to let you know, Dad's not drinking alcohol anymore. And she just gave me a massive hug. And I was a bit taken aback because she'd never really mentioned my drinking. I was like, no, okay. That's, and she just said, oh, I'm so proud of you and I'm so happy. I was like, okay. All right. Was it a problem? And she said, yeah, of course it was. But I just didn't know what to say. I thought it was normal that this is, what you do. And I think now what I was subconsciously teaching my children was life is really hard. You can't get through it unless you obliviate yourself every evening. Whereas now I teach them different things where it's kind of like, actually part of life is to push your own boundaries and see what you're, I mean, she's gone into the acting profession and is a global actress. She's been in a huge Netflix show. She's been on the red carpet in LA and London and all this kind of stuff. I take no credit for that whatsoever. But I've also been perhaps a role model that you can just push yourself, and even when the outcome is not necessarily certain, you can just give it a go and see what happens.
You are the one. That's what Ed Milet would say. You are the one. When your family lineage looks back, they're going to say, he's the one that changed it. And it's just going to continue getting better because we become like the five people we spend the most time with.
That's very true. That is very true.
Yeah. And
Um,
you've decided, you made the decision that you are going to replace the time and the energy and the poisoning of your body that you were doing for, I'm going to push my body. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to live a life. I'm going to not only leave a legacy, but you're living a legacy with what you're doing. Pretty cool
yeah,
stuff.
and and kind of more importantly, having fun while I do it. It's just more fun. There's nothing fun about being asleep on the sofa at 8:30 every evening, and then staggering to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, hoping you don't snore too loudly, things like that. It's just not fun. And one of the things I've learned as well about dopamine and serotonin and things like that is, you know, alcohol, gambling, cigarettes, all these kind of things that create dopamine. It inhibits serotonin. So you actually cannot experience happiness the way that you are designed to if you're indulging the dopamine all the time. And that just, when I first heard that, it made sense to me, because I thought, well, if alcohol made you happy, then I should have been the amount I was drinking, I should have been the happiest person, in the local area. And the reverse was true. I was completely miserable.
Oh, it's a
Um,
terrible depressant. It,
yeah, yeah. And pleasure and happiness are two very different things. And happiness now is, spending time with the people I care about, and, being out in nature and things like that. There's nothing happy about, drinking yourself into oblivion on the sofa every evening.
Right, right. And the thing is, people it's what we talked about before we got on was it's kind of the emperor has no clothes and people are realizing it, and it is getting cooler now to not be drinking. And you have a website, you have a Facebook that has how many people?
33,000 people in it.
Say it one
People are
more
really
time,
waking up.
please. 33,000 people are interested in your website. And what is it called?
So the website is soberinseven.com. But the Facebook group is the Sober Cafe. So, and it's a very non-judgmental place to just go and learn from other people. There are lots of AA people in there as well. It's very much, it's a free resource for people to come. I've got a wonderful team that help run it, and yeah. And if people want to get in touch with me, if you go to soberinseven.com, I run free web classes there, and you can book a call and have a chat with me. I think hopefully people have seen that, I love what I do, and this is not a high pressure type thing. I've been chatting to people earlier today, and I said, look, if you like the sound of me and I like the sound of you, then we'll speak again. This is not a get your credit card out kind of thing, because when I was looking for my answers, I would not have taken kindly to somebody doing that to me. I think I was just looking for somebody that I could look up to and kind of go, I want to be where you are. And I certainly didn't find that in AA when I went there. I just, I was sat there and I was thinking, I'm here looking for help, and actually I'm the happiest person in the room. So it didn't feel like a particularly appealing way, but I think the key thing is find what resonates with you and then head in that direction. My old boss he said, if you're stumbling around in the dark, when you finally spot the light at the end of the tunnel, just head in that direction. You just trust your instinct, trust your subconscious, trust your heart, that if something feels right, then you're going to feel happier about walking that path, whatever it is.
So sober in 7 is for alcohol. Is would you take on someone with other addictions?
The processes are the same. I mean, I think a lot of what makes my approach powerful is the kind of the lived experience of it. So, I've had people who, got class A things quite often. Pardon me. The people who have got other addictions, quite often alcohol's quite an enabler, quite a gateway sort of thing. A lot of people who do coke, um, it's kind of like, I know that if I wasn't drinking, I wouldn't be doing that. Uh, the number of people who say to me about stopping smoking, they say, "Oh, should I stop smoking at the same time?" I say, "Look, just don't worry." I said, "The smoking will take care of itself." As we go through this process, as you start to understand what's going on for alcohol, you're going to start to look at those things and go, wow, there is genuinely no upside for those things. Because, I mean, at least, you can concoct a story with alcohol that it's social and it's this, we're going to the bar and all this kind of stuff. There's nothing that kind of tobacco, has got going for it. It's like, yeah, if you want to go and be social, you're the one that's standing outside in the rain smoking a cigarette while all your friends are having fun in the bar. So I always say, just look, once you learn how addiction works, then you just start to decide to do things differently, and you take great care about what you start to put in your body. Even fast food and things like that. You start to understand that a lot of the stuff that's advertised, it's promoted, it's precision engineered to create an addictive response. And that's why it's successful. And once you become aware of that, then, to use your emperor's new clothes thing, it's kind of, you cannot unsee some of this stuff and you see it for what it is.
And that's the key right there is if I think people are afraid to walk through that door because of homeostasis. We're comfortable right where we are.
Yeah.
Children will go back to a mom and dad who physically abused them and they want to be there because it's what they know.
Yeah.
And guys, I just want to let you know that this approach, I've never heard of this approach, but I love this because it has nothing to do with giving up something. It's what are you going to gain?
Yeah.
Asking your brain, how is my spouse going to benefit from me not doing this? How are my kids? And I know that when you're really, really super far into it, you don't really care about them. You like to pretend you do, but you can't. You don't have the ability to. So what will it do for you? How do you get there? Is that resonating?
Oh, absolutely. And I sometimes speak, when people are, they're in the last chance saloon with a relationship and it's like, oh, got to do this for my wife or got to do this for my husband. I'm saying, no, 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 no. They will benefit from you being the best you, but this is all about you. This is about you being the father that you always want to be, the mother you always want to be, the partner you always want to be. But you have to turn this into a benefit for you. It's like people say to me about the charity. It's like, oh, you're so lovely and altruistic. I'm like, no, I do it for me because it makes me feel good about being me. And, there's, yes, other people do benefit, but make no mistake, I would not be slogging my way up over a mountain pass at 5,000 meters where there is no air, kind of thinking that I just want to get off my bike and cry if there wasn't something in it for me. Um, but, ideally you get a bit of a balance with it. But I think first and foremost, I think particularly with partners, when they're saying, I want to do this for my wife or my, you have to be careful with that because otherwise resentment can start to creep in. It's like, well, I'm doing all this for you. What are you doing for me? And I think that can be dangerous. Whereas if what you're doing is about you and you just accept that, everybody in your life is going to benefit because you're going to be calmer, you're going to be around longer, you're going to be more patient, you'll be more present, you're going to have more energy, you're going to have more time for them. There is it's hard to see a downside for them in any of this. But yeah, do it for you first and foremost. But everybody gets their slice of pie. I've got a lady that I'm working with just now, and she has her social life revolves around the bars, or the local pub. She lives in a small village, and she's like, I can't not go there because that's where the kind of the community is based. And so her husband pays her £5 every time she has a Diet Coke instead of a Bacardi and Coke. And I spoke to her 2 weeks in. She's like, I've got 200 quid. I've got £200. And so she now is using that to spend on stuff for her and her husband. So kind of gamifying it almost for her husband. He's like, I love this. This is great. I've got somebody who can drive me home if need be. But actually, this money that would have just gone over the bar and been flushed away down the toilet, now we can have, a night away in a nice hotel, or, we can pay a bit off the credit card, or that's, the payment on the car taken care of for this month, or whatever. So again, it's about shifting that mindset. It's kind of like, what have I got to gain from this? And actually, talking about the money is kind of important. It's like, what would you do with the money that literally you're rescuing out of the toilet? It just goes through your kidneys and disappears forever. Actually, what would you spend it on? How would you invest that in your happiness? Because you've been quite happy, maybe for years, to invest it in your misery.
Wow, that is brilliant. Okay, so sober in seven what?
Soberinseven.com. It's basically, there are 7 stages. So like when I was sketching this out at the side of the lake, there were kind of like 7 key steps. I was like, right, well, here are the kind of the non-negotiables, as it were. You need to do this. And actually the first one, for example, it's around the word freedom. And the F stands for focus. So as I've been saying around, we've got to focus on what you've got to gain, and you don't move on until you've got a really clear sort of sense around, actually, how's this going to be better for me? If alcohol was just not a problem, if it was just not a factor in my life, how would my life be better? And I take people through a kind of an exercise where they can start to really, turn that into some tangible things. You get yourself a vision board up with, the holiday that you're going to spend money on and things like that. Or the peace of mind that you get when you pay off the credit card early, or whatever. So it's a 7 kind of stage process.
All right. My goodness. This is the longest podcast I've ever done. I
Oh
am
my goodness, sorry
enjoying
about
it. Oh, this is so good. I don't know what my listeners are going to think, but I tell you what, I'm enjoying this so much. I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
You are living an epic life. No one could deny that you're living an epic life. What tips or tricks can you give our listeners to help them live their own epic life?
Well, I think it comes back to that decide thing. But I would say just, that kind of inventory, allow yourself to just be open to the possibility of what if. What if I did this? The Tour de France thing for me was really interesting. It was a stupid idea that I'd had for years. And I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be great to do that? And then when I got sober, it kind of took away the kind of the big sort of excuse. So just, if you've got a little stupid thought that just won't go away, just start to entertain the possibility of it, because that's where it all starts.
Okay. And the last question, this is Think Your Way to an Epic Life. What books, what what books, what podcasts do you listen to help you with your mental diet?
Oh, one of my absolute favorite books is Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. Total game changer for me. I really love The Chimp Paradox by Steve Peters. Excuses Be Gone by Wayne Dyer. That's a really a big one. I mean, some of the big classics like Man's Search for Meaning and Think and Grow Rich and things like that. Um, I'm a avid devourer of audiobooks. I probably listen to Who Moved My Cheese at least twice a year. I could probably I could probably write that book myself, but every time I listen to it, I get something out of it. It helps me just kick my own ass in a way that I wouldn't, again, you can't see the label when you're inside the jam jar, and it prizes me out of my own jam jar when I'm just getting a bit safe.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Complacency is not a good spot.
No.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. This has been very powerful. We appreciate you sharing. Thank you so much. And all your links are below. So, guys, if you want to do you do a discovery call for people?
Yeah. There's so if you have a look at there's various different ways of getting in touch on the website. So there's free web classes, there's get in touch, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And Happy New
Brilliant.
Year.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been magnificent.